She the queen, yeah, that's Queen Esquire. Legal trouble, she getting you out the fire. Another day and she solving another case, cause she litigate with dignity and grace. She the queen, yeah, that's Queen Esquire. Legal trouble, she getting you out the fire. Another day and she solving another case, cause she litigate with dignity and grace.
Hey Barbie, Chloe. Period I, period 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 period I, got my name up in your mouth, you don't know no better. Don't forget I'm from the south, yeah, I got them headers. You watching everything I do, studying all of my moves. What you could do, what I do. Period I, period period I, period period I, period period I, period.
Hello, litigators and opinionators. Court is now in session. Hello. So there I have a major update for the Bryan Kohberger story. If any of you have been following me for years now, 2 years ago, we covered this case in depth. We went through to dissect every nook and cranny of this story. Even before they determined who the ultimate suspect was, we investigated this case, and I have several videos of this dating back 2 years ago. Well, we finally have an update, and this I did not anticipate. So these people on the screen were the victims 2 years ago. They were in a sorority. They lived in Idaho. They were college students. They weren't from Idaho, a lot of them, but they went to school there. Some was on the mission of graduating. It's a very sad, tragic story. I know when we first heard about this story, a lot of people were very hurt and devastated by it and couldn't understand why these 4 individuals were brutally murdered. We pretty much dissected this case to find out that Bryan Kohberger was a sick person. He was a sociopath. We went over the fact that he was an incel. He couldn't seem to get girlfriends. He couldn't seem to attract women to him if it was the last thing on earth, y'all. He just wasn't able to do it. And he started to resent women. And he had an obsession later on, as we found out. He had an obsession with Ted Bundy. And now the pieces are starting to come together. So during their investigation into this case and preparing for trial, they found many searches on Mr. Bryan Kohberger's computer where he searched a lot of information about Ted Bundy, guys. And if you recall, you probably don't recall this, but 2 years ago, we dissected this story and we went over. This is one of my videos when I said Bryan Kohberger's mom exposed. She was opposed to Ted Bundy's execution. So 2 years ago, I went over this with you guys, and this was an article that Bryan Kohberger's mother put in the news when Ted Bundy was going to be executed, and she was opposed to Ted Bundy being executed. If you guys don't know who Ted Bundy is, you need to look him up. The guy was a psychopath. He had sexual addictions, and he basically went around murdering women that looked just like an ex-girlfriend that broke his heart, basically, and he started just killing women that looked exactly like her. For some odd reason, they had to have the split between, like, the part between their hair, and they needed to have dark hair, brunette women. But this article, let's just go back to it before we get into the updates. So Bryan Kohberger's mother, Mary Ann Kohberger, stated years ago in an article, she said, perhaps one of the saddest commentaries of mankind was evident during the execution of Theodore Bundy. While no sane, compassionate individual would excuse the atrocities committed by this man, neither would any sane individual applaud the passing of his funeral hearse. What have we become? Is the taking of human life acceptable when the state takes responsibility for it? So that was Bryan Kohberger's mom enabling her son's behavior by basically taking up for a man who brutally murdered many women, and I mean in the most horrific, inhumane way. Well, what's ironic about this article that she did years ago is that her son gained an obsession with Ted Bundy, and he wanted to be just like Ted Bundy. And that is why he emulated the very crime of Ted Bundy. There was a crime that where Ted Bundy years ago, he broke into a sorority girls' dorm room and he brutally beat and just did horrible things to multiple women in that dorm room. Well, similarly, in this case, Bryan Kohberger broke into a sorority home and brutally murdered 4 people. I think his intent was to murder one of the victims in this case that was on the second floor, but he ended up murdering the 3 other people because unfortunately those individuals woke up or were in a location where the target victim was located. So now we're here, guys, and I did not expect this. There was a lot of stuff that had been developing in this case. As you know, Bryan Kohberger is studying, and he was studying crime. And I think his whole purpose of studying crime and being in depth was trying to figure out and master how he could get away with murder. This man was a sociopath. You'll have to go back 2 years and look at the videos I did on this guy. We studied his mental. We really dissected some of his writings and things like that. And the man had a lot of mental health issues. He was thinking a lot of disturbing, violent thoughts when he was growing up. And his parents tried to get him help many times. They put him in rehab and just nothing was helping him. A lot of people thought he was weird. He was a drug addict back then. In undergrad and in his younger years. So the guy had a lot of issues and he had sexual addictions. Well, guys, the update in the story after giving you the background. And again, if you want to know more about the story, you can go back to my stories that I covered of this 2 years ago. I have so many videos on it if you want to really delve deep. But the update is, y'all, he pled guilty today. And I'm surprised. The reason why I'm surprised, because I just did not expect that, especially from him. He is a narcissist. He's the type of guy that I could see taking this all the way to the very end and would have got the death penalty. I think because his mother is opposed to the death penalty. As you can see, she was strongly opposed to the death penalty when it came to Ted Bundy. I believe that she did not want her son to have to be subjected to the death penalty. And he would for sure have gotten convicted because there was stacking more and more evidence against this man. In fact, I think what really put a nail into this man's coffin was the fact that the Uber Eats driver, she was arriving to the sorority girls' residence house at the very same time that Bryan Kohberger had walked out. He had pulled up. He pulled up and she pulled up at the same time. So she got to see exactly who he was. She knew his face. She knew his whole details. And she saw him before he had went in and murdered these individuals. So she was one of the witnesses in this case. And I believe her testimony would have been the driving force to convict this guy. Not just her testimony, but also the fingerprint on the knife sheath that he left. But this Uber Eats driver was a pretty strong witness. And she actually was seen on a lot of footage talking to officers because she had been pulled over recently for a DUI. And she told the officers then that she was supposed to be a witness in the Bryan Kohberger case because she saw him that night before he went in and murdered the Idaho 4. So this man knew the evidence was stacking against him. He knew he was going to get convicted. And he screwed up his whole little strategy of getting away with it. So today, guys, unexpectedly, I did not expect this. In my career, 11 years of being an attorney and practicing as a criminal prosecutor, I did not expect him to, given his mindset, admit guilt. I think he did it, though, because of the mere fact that his mother probably convinced him. Because his mother is strongly against the death penalty. She probably didn't want to lose her son. So she talked to her son and told him to enter a plea. So this is absolutely crazy, guys. Actually, let's go to the news video first before we read the article. But wow. Let me know what you guys think about the fact that he pled today.
Good afternoon. We have some breaking news here on ABC News Live Reports. I'm Alex Brachet in Washington. Right now, we are following news out of Idaho. Bryan Kohberger, accused of murdering 4 University of Idaho students in 2022, has accepted a plea deal. ABC News has confirmed that he has agreed to plead guilty to all counts. ABC News Live anchor Kana Whitworth is on the phone with us. She has been following this case from the beginning. And Kana, what details can you share with us about how this deal came together?
Yeah, Alex, I mean, this is simply a stunning turn of events in a case that has gripped this entire nation. Up until today, we were looking at an August 18th trial date with Bryan Kohberger's life on the line. What we know now from families who received a letter is that Bryan Kohberger has accepted a plea deal. In part of this plea deal, the defendant will plead guilty to all counts listed in the indictment. So that is 4 counts of murder as well as a burglary count as well. He will serve 4 life sentences consecutively with no possibility of parole. And the defendant will waive all rights to appeal this conviction as well. It also sounds like they will be seeking some restitution for families. This is things like money for funeral expenses and, victims' compensation. The next thing that's happening, Alex, is there will be a change of plea hearing, and that is this Wednesday, July 2nd. And so for some, this may be some finality and some closure. For others, you have to imagine, Alex, there are so many unanswered questions in this case, and I'm sure that there's fear that those questions will remain unanswered. But here we are after more than 2 years, the one and only suspect in the Idaho college murders case.
And you have to understand, guys, how shocking this is, because Bryan Kohberger's attorney, which was really she was irritating me. She was trying to put up all these hurdles to try to prevent the case from being proved. And I don't think that's really what a defense attorney should be doing. I understand that the defense attorney does have they don't have the burden. They really don't have to put on any evidence. They don't even have to put on any witnesses. They could just sit there and listen to the trial. And at the very end, the attorney can basically go and give their closing argument and it'll be done. But this attorney, I feel she was going way above and beyond to try to prove this guy was innocent when she knew good and well there was a wealth of evidence piling up that this man was guilty. I mean, there was there was one of the roommates that was going to testify, and she talks about the bushy eyebrows. I didn't think she was really going to be a reliable witness if they just had her. But the fact that they had the Uber Eats driver who literally pulled up, and she was a sober woman and with sound mind, she saw his full face, everything from height to detail, and even 2 years later, she can recall exactly it being Bryan Kohberger, and the fact that they had that sheaf and all of his driving patterns. They basically had every route that he had went, the photos after the murder, everything, y'all. It was a lot of proof. And one of the things too is he was basically stalking one of the victims. He wasn't necessarily approaching her or talking to her, but he was obsessed with Madison Mogen. Is that her name? Madison Mogen? Yeah, he was obsessed with her. She had all the physical physiques that he wanted in a woman. And we suspected years ago, if you guys have been on my channel for years, 2 years ago, we dissected this story inside and out. And we talked about the young ladies here. And I thought he was coming after this young lady right here. I thought that this was the victim where my mouse is. You see this mouse? I thought it was her because she had the physique that he liked, but it wasn't. He was not coming for her. A lot of you guys said you thought it was Madison Mogen. Well, you guys are correct. He was actually targeting this young lady. Unfortunately, Concalves was in the room. It wasn't expected for her to be there, but she was that night. And unfortunately, this young lady who was ordering the Uber Eats, he was asleep at the time. She was ordering an Uber Eats. That's why the Uber Eats driver came to drop food off to her. And when she came out of her room, that's when she ran into Mr. Bryan Kohberger and was murdered. And then I believe he woke up in the midst of this and just I think he was actually even still trying to wake up and was already getting stabbed. So he didn't even have time to really even know what was going on. But this young lady right here with the yellow sweater, she was the target. Bryan Kohberger, in my opinion, did not intend to kill all 4, but it happened. He didn't happen the way he planned. But this is an absolute shocker that he actually entered a plea. I do suspect that he realized that the evidence was piling up against him and there was a death penalty hanging on his head. And he realized that with all the evidence that they had, and they sat down and they assessed the full evidence, and I believe his mother put pressure on him because, as I mentioned 2 years ago, his mother was strongly against Ted Bundy being executed. And currently it was determined based on Bryan Kohberger searches, he had an obsession with Ted Bundy. So his family had weird obsessions with Ted Bundy, which I believe he developed as a kid because his mom was very obsessed with the Ted Bundy story. So there's all connections in this sick stuff. I'm kind of shocked because the defense attorney was putting up all these burdens and she was trying to prevent the trial from happening in August. And she was just pulling a lot of messy moves that I really didn't agree with on her end. But today he actually pled to all counts. On July 2nd, he will be appearing in court. One thing I don't agree with the prosecution on their end, I wish they would have had a stipulation or a requirement that he give a full account of what happened, why he did it, and like a full confession on the record in order to enter this plea. They did that in the Chris Watts case, and Chris Watts actually did a full statement, and I wish they would have done that for this case. So we'll definitely follow up once he does go to that hearing and enter his plea, officially entered the plea. Hopefully he will give a statement, but I don't think the prosecutor did actually require that.
The man who stood accused of murdering Xana Kernodle, Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonzalez, and Ethan Chapin. His name is Bryan Kohberger, and he has accepted a plea deal.
Well, and listen, Kana, of all the trials, it feels like we've been keeping track of over the last several weeks. This was the one that we anticipated was at least going to have some sort of resolution later on in the year at the earliest. But for our viewers that are just kind of catching up, can you walk us through what the past several months have been like with this case?
It's been tumultuous. There has been filing after filing and pushback from the defense, initially trying to delay the trial. They had maintained their client's innocence this entire time. They wanted to have the death penalty taken off the table. They tried many times unsuccessfully for that to happen. In the meantime, this has been under a
Bingo, you guys. That's what the main motive was. They were going to take it to trial because they didn't want the death penalty. But some reason they were able to convince the prosecutor that if he entered a plea on all counts, that they were going to take the death penalty off the table. Because the prosecutor, basically, they had to go talk to the Idaho Forest family first before they actually allowed Bryan Kohberger to enter this plea. They had to talk to them. They had to see what they felt about him spending his life in prison versus a death penalty. If the victims would have said, no, we don't agree with him spending life in prison, we would rather him get the death penalty, then the prosecutor would have rejected any options to plea and they would have just went forward with the trial. But I think what ended up happening during this process, they went and spoke to the victims and they got the approval of the victims, and the victims were okay with this end result that ended up unfolding with this change of plea. Like I said, Bryan Kohberger's mother is opposed to the death penalty, and she probably fought hard to talk to her son after all of the evidence started to come out. The more and more the evidence started to grow and come out, I think Bryan Kohberger thought about it and realized that he was not going to get out of this, and he was ultimately going to get the death penalty. So he probably felt pressure from his mom to go forward with that. He doesn't feel this is a guy who is an sociopath, so he doesn't feel any empathy for the people he killed, but yet he preserved his life basically for, I believe, the sake of his mother. That's what I really think.
A gag order. So people involved in this case have not been able to speak out about it, which is why so much of this case has been shrouded in secrecy. And we thought that it was going to go to trial in Moscow, and then it got moved down to Boise, and then it got pushed back yet again. And so here we are now, about a month before this trial was supposed to start, and we have learned that instead of a trial, there will be a plea deal.
And Kenna, do we know that in this plea deal, was there anything that was taken off the table? Was the death penalty taken off the table?
The death penalty is taken off the table So exactly, in exchange for pleading guilty, the death penalty will be taken off the table. It's a pretty standard cut and dry plea deal. There weren't very many concessions, which you have to imagine there may have been families out there that wanted concessions like that.
Well, and the other thing is, because we just saw your interview earlier today with the friends of some of these victims. I don't know if you've had a chance to speak with them since this news, but for our viewers, how are they hoping to remember their best friends?
It's so important, after speaking with Emily Allant and Hunter Johnson, the two that were the first to arrive at that King Road home, that the world remember their friends for how they lived their lives and not for their last day, not for how they died. I had a chance to speak with Ethan Chapin's entire family as well, and their family motto is to live like Ethan. He was a beaming, bright ray of sunshine. All of these kids were really described in that manner, and that's what's the most important here, is that we remember these kids, we remember how they lived, and we don't lose sight of the families here. Maybe there's finality here, but they never get to wake up with their kids ever, ever again.
Yes.
And I'd have to say, I'm really happy that he actually entered a plea, because the roommates who had to go through this, the other young individuals who came and saw them murdered and called 911 the next morning, thank goodness they don't have to testify. My gosh, guys, that would have been absolutely horrible, especially for the roommate that everybody attacked, the roommate who basically walked out, saw Bryan Kohberger walk out, and then she went in her room, shut the door and locked it the rest of the night, and didn't come out of her room to the next day. A lot of people were going in on her, and I did a full analysis of that and why I didn't think it was her fault. We did a lot of deep dives 2 years ago, so if you want to go back to those videos, you'll learn a lot about this story, this tragedy. But people were they were going to go in on her at the trial. I believe she was going to be cross-examined all the way to, the left, the right. They probably would have implicated her as the murderer and all this stuff. So it was a good thing that this happened. They also, what I thought was odd, is they destroyed the crime scene. They basically dismantled the house, which I thought was absolutely not okay. They should have kept it there so that they could have the jury walk into the house. So in a lot of ways, Bryan Kohberger entering a plea was the best thing that he could have done for himself. He was a narcissist too, so he thought he was going to be able to, prove his innocence. And after 2 years and analyzing all the evidence, and his mom probably sat him down and told him, look, son, you're going to need to enter a plea. This is all the evidence. I don't want to lose you. His family doesn't want to lose him. He realized it wasn't going to be proven. It just wasn't. But I'm so glad all those victims and the witnesses do not have to testify. That's the part I'm happy about. Are you guys shocked? Hi, Mar. Oh, yes. Mar says, to all the people defending Bryan, in your face. Exactly. Did you see all those people that used to defend this man? It was disgusting. Okay. Oh my gosh, I couldn't stand them always saying he's innocent and free Bryan. Hi, Dan. Dan says, then weird as this is, my manager at the hospital where I work went to school with Ted Bundy's first Utah victim, Nancy Wilcox. They sat next to each other in Olympus High School biology. Oh my gosh, Dan, that is crazy. Hi, Drew K. Hello, you're welcome. That is crazy, Dan. Oh my gosh. Yes, please like, comment, share, and subscribe, guys. Thank you, Betty. You are so amazing. I always appreciate your support. Yes, Island Girl, he took a plea, girl. He did exactly what Island Girl says. She's on point. He took the plea to avoid the death penalty. That was it, and that was all.
That's a great reminder. I remember in that interview hearing one of the friends talking about how they really kind of rejected this label of the Idaho 4, because you had four individuals who had different personalities and very much their own identities here, and that's something that we certainly don't want to lose.
Here's the money glitch that's getting women.
Sorry, guys. We got to go to this advertisement stuff. Hopefully, I'll skip it and get back to
ABC News Live reports. I'm Alex Bryan in Washington. Right now, we are following news out of Idaho.
Okay, so before we get into that one, I want to read this article, guys, because there was actually, like I told you, there was actually a letter sent to the victim's family first. They have to notify them. That is their requirement as the prosecutors. They must speak to the victims first. So they sent a letter to the victims, right? And they said Bryan Kohberger has agreed to plead guilty to all counts in the killings of 4 University Idaho students, sparing him from the death penalty, according to this part, to a letter sent to victims' family members. So they had to send a letter to the victims' family members first. Bryan Kohberger, who was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary in connection with the 2022 killings of roommates Kaylee Goncalves, that girl's last name, Goncalves, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Xana Kernodle's boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, will be sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences on the murder counts and the maximum penalty of 10 years on the burglary count, according to the plea agreement. Guys, they didn't even give him any room on the sentencing. Basically, the only thing that they took off was the death penalty. This man got the maximum sentence he could possibly get. He got 4 life sentences. He's not getting out. There's no chance of him getting out. He's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. That is crazy, y'all. They even gave him the maximum penalty for burglary. They weren't playing. And I absolutely he should. He killed 4 people in a horrific way. If I had it my way, he should have got the death penalty. That's what I feel, but it is what it is. Now, he will waive all his rights to appeal, guys, which means we don't have to worry about the gruesome long years of him appealing and him continually being thrust into our news system, clogging it up with his BS of a claim of defense, which he doesn't really have, okay? Prosecutors anticipate sentencing to take place in late July, as long as Kohberger enters the guilty plea as expected at a change of plea hearing that's scheduled for Wednesday, according to the letter received by the family of one of the victims. See, this is where the news is coming from. The news came from the victim's family themselves. They got a letter from the prosecutor and they went and talked to the news stations, and that's how this information got disseminated to the news reporters. So let's go back here. They're saying that, oh my God, the plea comes just weeks before Kohberger's trial was to be set to begin. Jury selection was set to start on August 4th, and opening arguments were scheduled on August 18th. Prosecutors said in a letter to families that the state was approached last week by Kohberger's defense team. Look at this, guys. Whoa! The defense team came up to them, guys. See, this is what the oh, y'all, I got too excited. What I didn't do here. Sorry, y'all. Let me get up out of here. Let me go back to that. I got too excited and pushed the back button. That was some good stuff. Hold on. Where was that article at? Oh my God, that was a good article, guys. Okay, I'm back. Sorry, let me find it again. This article is good. Y'all, so basically what was happening all this time, and I really didn't want to waste my time covering it, is basically the defense attorney was going back and forth for months trying to delay this trial, talking about she doesn't have enough time to defend Bryan Kohberger. I'm like, girl, you've had this case for 2 years and you don't feel you're prepared. In my opinion, you're incompetent because you should have been prepared these last 2 years. What were you doing the past 2 years? She made up every excuse in the book talking about, I'm not prepared. I'm not prepared. Please continue it out. I'm not ready for August 4th. And she started to try to blame and implicate the prosecutors for leaking information to various news channels and Dateline and all these people, y'all. She was trying everything in the book. And when all her little semantics didn't work, they finally just buckled down and they went and sat down with Bryan Kohberger and was like, bruh, you about to die, okay? You's about to lose your life if you don't plead. And Bryan Kohberger being, he talked to his family, in my opinion, and his family was like, we do not want you to die. We think you really should enter this plea, try to see if, they can take the death penalty off the table. His family is really kind of have a sick background too. Y'all need to go over some of the videos I went over this because the family is weird. The sister, she was involved in some movie that involved her getting stabbed to death. The mom is obsessed with Ted Bundy. This Bryan Kohberger had all kind of mental health issues. It's just a mess. But let's keep going. Okay. So Jury selection was set for August 4th. Opening arguments were scheduled for August 18th. Prosecutors said in a letter to families that the state was approached last week by the Kohberger's defense attorney, y'all, asking to be presented with an offer. Guys, whenever an attorney goes to the opposing counsel and they ask for a plea, they already have done everything in the book to figure out this case. And they already know, after fully assessing this case, all of the evidence, they know that they're not going to win. They already know it's a guarantee their client is going to lose, no matter what they try to put on that panel. They have analyzed every nook and cranny of the evidence, and they've already came to their conclusion that they're not going to win the case. And more than likely, after he murdered these 4 beautiful young adults, then that they already knew the jury was going to give him the death penalty. They already knew. And so they talked to Kohberger. It was like, bruh, we need to go ahead and talk to the prosecutor, and we need to ask the prosecutor what kind of plea they're going to give you, and maybe they could take the death penalty off, okay? So then the prosecutor said they then met with available family members last week. You see what I told you guys? If you were here at the beginning, I told you that before the prosecutor can ever enter or any type of negotiations or plea deals with the opposing counsel when it comes to criminal actions, they have to speak to the victims. And they have to usually either get the approval of the victims or advise the victims that, hey, this is the right reason because we don't have enough evidence for this reason. Or they could also talk to the victims and say, we have some witnesses that don't want to relive this, or we don't want you to have to relive this and suffer and see autopsy video, photos, images. We don't want you to go through that as a family. You guys want to assess this? This is what we're looking into offering the defendant. And then the victim's family weighs in on what they think should be the proper sentence. And I believe when they sat down and they talked to the victims' families came up with, well, if you take off the death penalty, because a lot of the victims' families are very, they're believers in Christ. A lot of them have faith. So I believe they would have forgiven him in terms of the death penalty. But I believe they would have wanted him to serve the maximum that he could have served available, which is full life for all victims that are involved, and the maximum that they could get. So I think that's where the prosecutor came up with the plea deal. So they said after they talked to the victims first, waited the right path forward, and made a formal offer to Kohberger. So like I said, they talked to victims. Victims was okay. They're okay with this resolution. They said, this resolution is our sincere attempt to seek justice for your family, prosecutors wrote in the letter. This agreement ensures that the defendant will be convicted, will spend the rest of his life in prison, and will not be able to put you and the other families through the uncertainty of decades of post-conviction appeals. You see how the prosecutor, when they talked to the family, they reassured the family that we're going to basically require that Kohberger waive all opportunities to appeal his plea. So he will not be able to come back later and try to file an appeal and claim up and down that he was coerced by his defense attorney, all this stuff, because he's going to not only enter a plea on all of the counts, but he's going to waive any future opportunities, y'all, to litigate this in the future. No appeals. That is a strong plea, y'all. Okay. And then they said that this agreement ensures he will be convicted. Let's see what they say. Oh, they said your viewpoints weighted heavily. Look what I told you. They have to weight the victim's opinion about the sentencing in our decision-making process. And we hope you may come to appreciate why we believe this resolution is in the best interest of justice. Okay, so they listened to all the concerns of the family. And it looks like to me, some of those family members were not okay with this plea deal, because the fact that they said, we hope this will be the best, that you will accept this as a term of justice. Probably some of them families was like, nope, we want him to die. We want him to get the death penalty. We don't care about going through this trial. So the prosecutor probably had to go against some of the family members during their whole determination of the sentencing, but they did weigh heavily on their opinions of that resolution. The state also will seek restitution for the victims and their families according to the agreement. The 4 University of Idaho students were all stabbed to death in the girls' off-campus house in the early hours of November 13, 2022. 2 roommates inside survived, including one roommate who told authorities in the middle of the night she saw a man walking past her in the house, according to court documents. The roommate described the intruder as not very muscular, but athletically built with bushy eyebrows. He had very distinct eyebrows. That really what gave him away. According to documents, this was the former house, for those who didn't know about this story, which was eventually destroyed. Basically, they destroyed the house. The shocking quadruple killings shook the small college town in Moscow, and it catapulted the national media interest and launched a nearly 7-week manhunt. And guys, if you guys were with me 2 years ago, you guys know there were tons of YouTubers trying to be investigators. There was some woman who was a psychic that implicated people that weren't involved. It was a mess. That woman probably got sued too for defamation. It was a hot mess. Everybody who was talking about this story ended up being wrong too, because it turned out to be this random person, Bryan Kohberger. Nobody guessed him. Anyways, in December 2022, Kohberger, a criminology PhD student at nearby Washington State University at the time, was arrested at his parents' home in Pennsylvania. DNA matching Kohberger's was found on a K-bar knife sheath by one of the victim's bodies, prosecutors said. Defense lawyers have said Kohberger was driving around alone on the night the killings occurred. Yeah, he was already a done deal, y'all. So I'm excited. The next hearing is July 2nd. Hopefully I can come back on and we can talk about that hearing when he enters his plea. But I am so happy, y'all. So happy. So that's the update. Betty, hi, Betty. Betty says he needs to be put under the jail. Yes, girl. He's never getting out. There will be no opportunity for parole. He is there for life. Mar said, Bryan's defense team is getting paid big bucks. Yes, Mar. Yes. The thing is, they are public defenders. So they're not really getting, the regular paycheck that they would normally get as private defense attorneys. They're just going to get the government paid check that's less than what they would get if they were private defense attorneys. So, not really getting paid. I'm saying they're getting, public defenders get paid pretty low. Right. Mar said he did it. Yes, Drew. Yep, I'm excited. To all people who defend him, pound sand, y'all. Hi, everybody. Right. Okay, let's see. Giselle said, this is absolutely mind-boggling. What a waste of time waiting for a trial just for him to plead guilty. Right, Giselle, girl. But this is the norms of trial. This is exactly what happens a lot of times. They will litigate this case out 2 years. The defense attorney will drag it out, trying to find every reason that they can to keep certain key evidence out. They'll have hearings such as motions to suppress, claiming that their client's rights were violated. Therefore, they want to keep certain evidence away from the jury, try to hide evidence from the jury. That's why I really never wanted to be a criminal defense attorney, because I didn't like some of the shady things that they do for their clients. Like, they do some very shady stuff. They will make up false information. They will create a false story about their client's defense to make it look something like something is not, to try to confuse the jury. They will misquote the law a lot of times. I just don't like the shady, unethical stuff that they do sometimes. So, and that is just my opinion about them. Again, it's not a fact, but it's just the things that I've seen in the year that I've practiced and the shady stuff that they've seen. I just never really liked how they operate. Right, Drew, he did waste so many resources, girl. He was trying his best to try to get away with this murder. But I'm telling y'all, when that witness, the Uber driver, came out and she said she saw him, y'all, I already knew he was done. I was like, he's done. Once she came out and spoke, and she spoke recently too. So once she spoke and she said she saw Bryan Kohberger drive next to her and she was about to testify, it was a done deal. That man was about to get convicted. I bet that witness is happy now because she had a DUI. She got a DUI recently. Oh, she was a DoorDash driver. Let's go over that before I close this out. There was a DoorDash driver, y'all, who saw the whole thing. And Court TV talked to
everyone is welcome.
So let's look at this real quick, y'all, before we end the live. This is crazy. Absolutely. Let's wait till this ad goes away. Come on, ad, go away. Okay, we're here.
4 Idaho college students is set to face a jury. This is going to take place in just a few weeks, and Court TV will be there for it all.
Right now, jury selection is set to begin July 30th, but his attorneys are fighting to have the trial delayed. Kohberger returned to court yesterday for a hearing on the defense's motion to push back the trial start date. We'll bring you that hearing in just a moment.
The conversation was captured on body camera video. Let's take a listen to that. Woman told police after a traffic stop last.
Now, we're learning more details about the investigation into Bryan Kohberger, including the DoorDash driver that Vinny just mentioned, who says she saw Kohberger near the house that night.
That 44-year-old woman told police after a traffic stop last year that she may be called to testify in this high-profile trial. Her conversation was captured on body camera video. Let's take a listen to that.
And then now I have to testify. So yeah, because I'm a DoorDash driver, so yeah. You have to testify in which murder case? College Park. Oh.
All right, let's bring in our guest this hour to discuss. Trial attorneys can.
Crazy work, y'all. She had to testify. She was saying she had to testify. Actually, she said more than that. I wonder why they didn't play the clip where she actually said she saw Bryan Kohberger. She said his name. So I'm not seeing that clip that they played in here. But she actually said it, guys. She said she saw Bryan Kohberger. Now, she probably didn't know his name at the time, but she said his name during that whole situation. And the reason why she was being interrogated at that time was because she was being pulled over for a DUI. She had some medication in her system, some prescription medication, and she was driving pretty erratically, and they ended up pulling her over. And when she was being interrogated at the jail, she was like, man, no, I have to testify in, that murder case with the college students. And she did say Bryan Kohberger during her questioning. She's like, I saw Bryan Kohberger. I drove right next to him. I pulled up, when he was there before he murdered them. And she was saying that she felt the prosecutors would be mad at her because she got this DUI conviction just recently. She just was charged, not convicted yet, but charged with a DUI. And the officer was like, don't worry about it. The prosecutor may not be happy with you getting a DUI, but you just have to take the witnesses as they are. And you do, as a prosecutor, you have to take your witness as they are. If they have a prior conviction, you have to be upfront with the jury, tell them what their flaws are, and clean it up. Like basically they would be like, is it true that you were pulled over for a DUI recently? And they're like, yeah. And let's just take it back to the night of the murder. Were you intoxicated at that time? No. Were you driving intoxicated? No. Were you pulled over at that time for a DUI? No. And then move on. That's kind of how a prosecutor would do that. They would just, go over that at the beginning, clear it up. And then they would use it in their closing argument to say, hey, she got a DUI 2 years after this incident. During the incident, she was not charged and had no record of any DUIs, and she was not intoxicated as she testified, and there were no indications that she was. So that's how they would clean that whole thing up. But they do have to come up forward and tell the jury, because if they hide anything from the jury, then the jury is not going to trust them, and more than likely not even trust any evidence that they put on, because they're going to think that they're being deceptive. And when a jury figures out that an attorney is being deceptive and tricky or hiding information, then they're more than likely not going to rely on the evidence that they present to them, and more than likely they're going to rely on the attorney that they think is more honest and more forthcoming with the evidence and doesn't hide even the bad information, because they want to find that attorney that they can actually trust. So yeah, this is the update, guys. Let me know what you think about this update. Did you guys see this coming? Did you guys think he was going to enter a plea? Because I could tell you I did not. I was expecting for this trial to happen. I was waiting for all of the information to unfold. I was looking forward to that trial. So I'm a little somewhat disappointed, but in a way, I'm more happy for the victims that they don't have to go to trial, relive this tragedy, see their loved ones, being testified, see the horrific photos and the details that the coroner would have to go over about how their death occurred and all the wounds they had and what was the cause of death. And that would have been a horrible thing for the family to have to sit through. So this was a good outcome. We will come back and reconvene July 2nd when they actually have the hearing. All right, like, comment, and subscribe. Take care.